The Volvo XC40 might be the most successful car to make the switch from full combustion to electric. The brand tells us that now over 50% of its buyers are picking the EV version of this one here, despite the fact that it's now over 6 years old in this form. So what's drawing buyers to the XC40 over a Mercedes-Benz, a BMW or a Lexus? Well, we've spent 3 months and several thousand Ks with this one here, and here's what we found out. The exact version of the Volvo XC40 we've been testing is a base fully electric variant, which was relatively recently added to the range. And I know I said this generation is getting on in years now, but the EV in particular received some major upgrades for the 2024 model year, which almost make it a brand new car underneath. Importantly, it's made the switch to primarily rear-wheel drive, with this base version also adding a new price point to the range. But while its price point has improved, especially with the introduction of this base rear-wheel drive version, it's still very much a luxury car, and it doesn't rival something like the Tesla Model Y on price. Rivals have also recently managed to close the value gap with the XC40, and these include the sharp new BMW iX1, the Mercedes-Benz EQA, Lexus UX300E, and the new Mini Countryman. In early 2025, you'll also be able to consider Audi's long-awaited Q4 e-tron. Standard gear is also great, but the cloth seat trim may be unexpected for buyers in the luxury segment. Elsewhere, it scores heated front seats with memory functions, a heated steering wheel, panoramic sunroof, dual-zone climate, LED headlights, 19-inch alloys, and tinted windows. On the inside, the XC40 is one of the few cars which feels a bit more ready for the internet age, with a Google-based always-online operating system. This is kind of neat because you can sync your Google account up with it and the car will carry all of your map preferences across. Plus, it's proven to score meaningful software updates semi-regularly in our time with the car, and those have improved various functions. It also gets a phone app. While it doesn't quite have the same speed or functionality as the excellent Tesla app, it's still one of the better options on the market. Is there a downside to all of this? Well, the XC40 isn't the most modern or well-equipped luxury or electric car today. Many rivals get things like a head-up display, standard leather seats, surround parking cameras, and vehicle-to-load functionality, none of which feature, at least on this entry grade. Oh, and we should probably also mention that this car won't be called the XC40 for much longer. Before the end of 2024, the electric version is set to be renamed to the EX40 to match up to the rest of the brand's EV range. But Volvo also tells us this name change won't come with any spec changes, at least not initially. Now I'm going to be clear here, the XC40 is still my favourite piece of small SUV design. Even though it's 6 years old, it could have been released today and it would still look just as modern as all of its contemporaries. How can this be the case? Well, to me, it's down to the subtlety of this car's aesthetic. Unlike rivals, there's nothing extreme or ostentatious about it. It doesn't try to bash you over the head with how sporty it is. It doesn't offer a massive gaudy grille. It's not adorned with too much chrome or aerodynamics. Even the wheel choices and the closed-in face which the electric version gets are gentle tweaks, which don't beg people to realize that this is the fully electric version. There's an elegance to its simplicity, and one that I think is helping it stand the test of time. In fact, I'd be confident telling you that if you bought one this late in its model cycle, it'll still look good in a few years' time. Inside, it's much the same. It's simple without being boring. It's a little bit luxurious, but without being lavish. I quite like that about the interior, but I will admit that it is very grayscale compared to a lot of its sort of luxury small SUV alternatives. The brand's managed to add some intrigue in here through this rubberized embossed map of its hometown in Sweden running through the dash, which is a really nice kind of attention to detail touch. And I quite like the carpet trims in the doors and these cloth seats too. I know they're not leather like you might expect from a luxury car, but I kind of like nice cloth seats making a return in vehicles like this. Now, that having been said, I have noticed there are a few little areas where the XC40 is starting to feel its age in the cabin here. For a start, you've got these screens. Now, I actually quite like the software. It's simple, it's not super functional, like it doesn't have a lot of features that some other modern EVs have, but I like how easy it is to operate. The small screen size is modest and every function of it is just easy to get in a handful of taps, which is really nice. And it also doesn't suffer too much from having really small shortcut buttons, although you do have to operate the climate systems through the touchscreen, which is always a bit of a miss for us. It would be nice to have a set of dials down here. It does have one dial, that's for your volume, and it's got sort of back and forward buttons for the multimedia. Nice to have that, but it would be nice to have a full climate unit as well. The dash here also follows the same theme as the rest of the car in that it's really simple. It has bare bones functionality that is really straightforward. I actually don't have too many complaints about it. Usually when I see a digital dash like this that doesn't have many features, I tend to complain because what's the point in having a digital dash if it doesn't have lots of different themes and ways to modify it? But this one is just so well executed that I don't think it needs to do anything different. It has an integrated map screen and your speed on one side and your power and charge level on the other. And that's all it really needs to show you. You press a button to bring up your trip stats and a software update actually launched for this car, and this is another interesting thing. It's always online, and the brand has pushed several software updates in the time that I've had the car, one of which added something which I really wanted from the moment I picked it up, and that's showing your trip stats in the dash. It didn't used to do that, and now they've pushed an update and I can actually see how long the trip's going to take. So if someone calls me and says, how long are you going to be, I can actually just tell them without having to flick through the multimedia screen to see how long the nav says left. And that's a really nice touch. So it's good to see that the brand is actually making the most of that online connectivity and actually modifying and improving the car as time goes on as well.
We liked this car when it launched, and with minimal changes here and there after 3 months with the car, well, we still like it.
Now, in my time with the car, and keep in mind we've had it for 3 months, and we've compared it to a few other cars in this class as well, I have noticed a few things about it that kind of remind you that it's based on a combustion car platform, and that's especially evident when it comes to the storage. There isn't actually a lot of storage in this cabin. For a small SUV in this class, I think the game has moved on from where this cabin is now. Again, love the design, but it does feel very narrow in here. I feel like there's plenty of room for an adult in the seats, and the seats are actually really comfortable even though they are that cloth material. But storage down the center here, yes, it gets 2 cup holders, which the Polestar 2 doesn't get. Keep in mind, this car shares a platform with the Polestar 2. Polestar 2 is lower, so it doesn't get the 2 cup holders here. The center console design is a bit like over-designed in that car, so it doesn't have the sort of open space that this car gets. But I don't think they've made the most of this space in this car either. So the 2 cup holders is great, but this kind of storage bay underneath the console here is very limited. They've put the wireless charger in the middle. It doesn't wireless charge my phone particularly well. I find it has a bit of an intermittent sort of connection with my phone in terms of charging, which is a shame. It doesn't have wireless Apple CarPlay either. I'm assuming because this system is a little bit dated now, but that makes it so you basically end up just plugging your phone in. And also, this storage area, because the wireless charger's in the middle, the storage areas on either side are tiny, so you can't really use the space for anything else. So they've got this big kind of opening and you can't really use it for anything. And then there's some other odd touches. So it's got this little flip open bay, which again, they could have gotten rid of that and made the space bigger, but it's literally an ashtray. Like that's literally what that's for. You never see that in a car anymore, but anyway, bizarre. And then if you go in behind here, you've got this thing here. This is, I wasn't sure what this was when I picked the car up. I thought it was just like a strange kind of extra storage bay. It turns out, and I only had to pull it out of the console to figure this out, it's a bin, so you can put a little liner in here. You can take the top off and put a little liner in here, and then you can put all your rubbish in there, and it's like a one-way kind of lid, so it doesn't spill out. And then you can just take it out and empty the bin. So that is actually quite clever. I'll hand it to them for that one. But my other issue is this center console is kind of small. Normally in an EV like this, it'd be quite deep, or you'd have extra storage under this console here, but you don't get that here, and that's because it's got a pass-through, which is normally reserved in a combustion car for all-wheel drive hardware. So a little small in the storage. It's even a little small in the doors. You do get a bottle holder in there, but it's not massive, and the same goes for the pockets. It's just sort of a little limited, and I kept finding all the time that I was running out of storage in this cabin. But other than that, it's a nice space, although a little hard plastic around as well. So if you are expecting that kind of lavish luxury sort of space, it's not up to the standard where a lot of cars in this class might be. Same goes for storage. So look, it's a little give and take in here. I really like how simple it is. You might expect something more, you might expect a bit more storage, and for that you might need to look at another car, but I think there's a nice balance in here for someone who doesn't need too much of that stuff. Let's go look in the back seat. Okay, so back seat of the XC40. Again, there are quite a few things that we should probably note in here. Firstly, I fit pretty well. That's behind my own driving position there. As you can see, I've got enough room for my knees. I'm 182 centimeters tall, plenty of room for my feet, and headroom, well, it's okay. It is getting a little close, so you wouldn't want to be too much taller than me. It's quite a dark grayscale space in here. There's a heavy tint on the windows, even on this base version of the car, so it feels a little bit closed in. Again, you can feel that narrow sort of feeling, and this center seat position is going to be a really tough sell for an adult because you've got that raised console. Again, this car being based on a combustion car platform that just comes with the territory, so that's a really sort of tough sell to fit a full-sized adult in here. And there are a few drawbacks for storage as well, but I will first mention that this car does get a panoramic sunroof, which is nice. Its Polestar 2 relation also gets a panoramic sunroof, but this one actually has a sliding cover. So if you leave it out in the sun in an Australian summer, it's not going to completely boil the interior like a lot of other EVs that get these panoramic sunroofs without a cover. So I just thought I'd call that out. However, because it has a panoramic sunroof, there's also no rear dome light. So imagine trying to fit a child seat in here at night. You wouldn't be able to see anything. And on top of that, these doors, and I'm assuming this is for a safety reason, they don't open very far. So even just putting luggage in here can be a bit of a task because the doors kind of only open a little bit. I can't imagine what it's going to be like if you put a child seat back here, and that's just worth calling out because a lot of people might want to use this as a little family car. So keep that in mind. Now, in terms of storage in the cabin, we've got, here's a bottle I've prepared earlier, some pockets in the doors. Again, you get these like nice sort of, there's a synthetic leather trim for the armrest. That's nice to have. There's these cool carpet trims in the door here, but the door pockets themselves are really small. And so I can't fit my bottle in here. I can't really fit much in there. Like I can fit like a tiny can of drink or something, but that's about it. You've got hard plastics on the backs of the front seats, which doesn't feel super upmarket, and you've got little elastic nets as well. It'd be nice to have full pockets because these tend to sort of get a bit ratty after you put a few things in them. And then there's a set of adjustable air vents on the back of the center console, which is nice to have. There's a set of 2 USB-C ports, and this one even gets heated seats in the rear outboard positions, and that's because it's more efficient than using the air conditioning. So that's kind of like a nice sustainability touch. You also get a drop-down armrest piece there, so if you do need cup holders, well, you can have some, but you do sacrifice that center position.
The boot measures in at 410 litres. It's not the biggest boot in this space, but it is a nice square area, which was able to accommodate our luggage set with relative ease. This version also gets an underfloor storage area, which is great for your charging cables, as well as a boot divider if you don't want smaller objects to move around when you're on the go.
Under the bonnet, well, there's not a whole lot. In fact, there's extra storage, and that's because all the drive hardware has moved to the rear axle. It's a new drive unit for this MY24 version as well. See the power outputs for that on your screen now. You can also have it as a twin motor, but I'd argue that's almost overkill when it comes to power.
Why the switch to rear-wheel drive? Because it's more efficient for an EV, of course. This switch, combined with the fact that the XC40 gets updated drive units, makes for one of the biggest upgrades to this car, which has significantly reduced its energy consumption. You see, when the EV version first came out, it was all-wheel drive only, and honestly a bit of a hog when it came to energy consumption. When I first drove that car, I almost couldn't believe how much energy it was chewing through, despite it being a hilarious sleeper with massive amounts of power on tap. This new rear-wheel drive one though uses a much more sensible amount of energy. Officially, it's 17.3 kilowatt hours to 100 Ks, but I've managed to best that number in my time with the car, and it actually shows more than the official driving range on the dash when it's at a full charge, and I reckon that's pretty impressive. On the topic of range, you can expect 435 kilometers for this battery and motor combo, which I reckon is probably right for an SUV this size, and more than enough for primarily city dwellers. I've taken this car on a few freeway trips, and interestingly, the range was significantly less of an issue than the charging infrastructure, which is now falling behind, particularly in regional areas with the amount of EVs now on our roads. It's worth noting as well that consumption spikes significantly on the open road. While the XC40 has its best consumption around town, I was seeing more like 19 kilowatt hours to 100 Ks on the freeway, and that can hamper range quite a bit. This, plus the lack of infrastructure, is particularly worth considering if you're a regional buyer. There may be better options for you out there.
When you do find a charger though, It's quite good news. The XC40 can charge up at a rate of 150 kilowatts on DC, and that means you can top up from 10 to 80% in about 34 minutes. On AC, meanwhile, you can top up at a rate of 11 kilowatts. And that's important because at the kind of slow charges at shopping centers you'll find, you can add about 70 kilometers of range an hour, which makes it well worthwhile plugging in while you're doing a grocery shop. So before we launch onto the road, one interesting thing about the electric version of the XC40 is that it's got no start button. You just sit in it and you can pull the drive lever forward and then off you go. There's no need to like hit go. There's no need to, when you get out of it, turn it off. You just put it in park and walk away. It's kind of interesting. It's very Tesla-like, but it can be a little bit annoying. Like if you want to keep the ignition on, there is a way to do that, but you have to do this like special combo with the remote to get it to stay on. And that can kind of be annoying sometimes. The car won't turn on otherwise unless you've got someone sitting in the seat, which is a bit odd. Anyway, I find it at the same time a little bit convenient, but a little bit annoying. So take from that what you will. Let's go for a drive. Ever since we were introduced to the XC40, it has been a great little SUV to drive. It doesn't really have any offensive characteristics about it. I think one thing that the brand has done so well when it comes to electrifying it is it just feels like it could have been an electric car from the beginning. There isn't really any of that awkwardness that you sometimes get from converted combustion cars that go to electric, in that the drivetrain doesn't really quite feel like it was meant to be electric from the beginning or anything like that. This is a really clever, smooth drivetrain, really great regenerative braking. And I think the most interesting thing of all is that Volvo isn't bragging about the massive changes that it made to this car for the 2024 model year. In that switch to rear-wheel drive, it didn't just change the motor around and switch things up ever so slightly. There's been some significant changes to this car's suspension, to the way it steers and drives. There's been software upgrades. The new motor is worth bragging about, and yet Volvo just call it the MI24 and don't sort of remind you of all of these cool new things they've done to improve it so much. It's so modest, which you never see from a car maker. But these changes are really important because prior to this upgrade, the electric version of the XC40, firstly, it was only all-wheel drive and it was enormously powerful and a bit silly, but it rode really hard, and there were some things about it, like it felt really heavy on the road, and those traits about it weren't great. But in this upgraded version, and especially this rear-wheel drive version, it feels lighter. The suspension is so much better. It's gone from being kind of a horrible, brittle EV into something much more compliant on the road and really actually lovely to live with. There is a little bit of hardness to the ride still. I mean, after all, it is an EV. It is quite heavy for a small SUV. It's got, you know, almost 70 kilowatt hours of batteries under the floor, and it has to tame that in the corners. And I think, you know, if you are a keen driver at the end of the day, there's always the Polestar 2, which is lower and handles its weight even better with its own MY24 upgrade. But this Volvo, it's improved out of sight compared to the previous one, and it just surprises me so much that the brand isn't out there bragging about it more, because it's much more comfortable, it's much easier to drive, and overall it's a really lovely experience. So other traits you should know about: yes, it's got that improved ride, which makes it much more comfortable in the everyday, but also it's got really nice light steering and a really smooth drivetrain. So while it sounds like it's going to be quite powerful on paper, it's actually quite moderate as it rolls that power on, and it makes sure that you don't spin the rear wheels too much, even if you kind of stomp on it. And that's different from a Tesla. Like, if you're looking for an EV that is breakneck fast, this probably isn't it. Does it have plenty of power? Yes. Does it moderate how it delivers that to the ground? Also yes. So if you're looking to terrify your friends, if you're looking for an EV that's got that crazy 0 to 100 sprint time, this probably isn't the one for you. But you do still have plenty of power in reserve for overtaking. Even on the freeways, it's geared quite well for that as well, which not all EVs are. And that's why this car, I think, has been so successful in its switch to EV, because if anything else, it's just better than the combustion versions in terms of pretty much all of its traits. Now, can you switch things up in terms of the drive experience using drive modes? Well, it doesn't really have any drive modes. It's got an off-road mode, which I assume just sort of tunes the traction to low traction surfaces. But other than that, you can change the steering to a heavy mode, which I don't really like because it feels artificially heavy in the sense that it feels like you're fighting an electric motor in the steering rack. It's not actually making it any more engaging to use, at least that's what I think. And the other thing worth noting is that in terms of being an EV, well, it's got quite a heavy single pedal driving mode, and the two modes that you can pick from are either end of the extreme. So you can either have it be full single pedal and have like really heavy regen. I quite like driving cars like that. I've been in EVs for quite a while now, so I'm used to that single pedal driving mode. But if you do want to drive it more like a combustion car, you can switch single pedal completely off. And then what it does is it doesn't use regen at all when you let off the accelerator. You have to hop on the brake and it blends it in that way. Personally, I prefer the regen mode, but if you're coming out of a combustion XC40, for example, and you want it to just feel like that, that's the mode for you. But I do find it interesting that there's no in between. There's no like moderate regen mode. There's no like adjustable braking or anything like that. It's either all the way on or all the way off. Will it be good when you're taking it on a few curvy roads on the weekend? Look, I've done that myself several times. The rear drive does add a little bit extra engagement to this platform, to this chassis. The steering is really reactive. I even prefer it in that light mode in the corners because it feels more like how the steering rack actually is rather than feeling artificial, like you get in some Kias, for example. Is it the best car to steer around a few corners? Well, obviously, having driven the Polestar 2, I think that's far preferable because you're so much lower to the ground. This car does feel its additional height and that offset balance when you're trying to sort of steer it a bit more aggressively. So I think if that's you, if you're that buyer, you're gonna, spend a lot more time on the weekends doing some curvy roads, probably look at a Polestar 2, but that does come with some practicality compromises as well. The other thing I've noticed about it on longer journeys, yes, it's really comfortable. Yes, the active safety kit is really good in this car. It's not constantly annoying you with like lane keep assist. The adaptive cruise control is excellent, things like that. But there is a little bit of sound that enters the cabin, especially from those tires. Wind noise, not so bad, but the tire noise, it does sort of build up over time and you start to notice it a lot more. And I think that is because this car does ship on quite aggressive, I think there's P0s on this particular version, and that's like an aggressive tire. It's not a comfort tire. It is an EV version of that tire that helps give it the long range, but it's probably not the best for sound deadening in the cabin, and you do notice that on a longer trip. So what that leaves us with is a really vastly improved car. I mean, so few cars have made the switch to being fully electric as well as this one. It's only improved, and as much as I'd like to say, don't believe the hype, it's don't believe the lack of hype. Like, this car not only has it improved so much from being electric, but it's improved so much model year on model year from behind the wheel, and Volvo isn't even talking about it. So there you go. Much improved car to drive. I really like it. Safety systems, not invasive. Obviously, it's got the lot. Check out our full review over at carsguide.com.au to see that list of safety kit. It's a Volvo, so you'd expect it to have a high standard of safety, and as far as the ratings go, it does. So that's good to see.
The XC40 scored a maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating back in 2018, one which ANCAP says applies to all current variants, including the fully electric ones.
In terms of ownership, you've got standard sort of 5 years and unlimited kilometers of warranty. That's pretty par for the course these days. It's not special, but it's also not bad. And then on top of that, you've got the usual kind of 8 years and 160,000 Ks of warranty that usually comes on an EV like this. The one thing that is notable about about this car's ownership experience is the service intervals. You only need to take this car to a workshop once every 2 years or 20,000 Ks, and that's like a really long interval. That's nice to see. I would be careful to check the tires though. On EVs, tires are really important, and that's something that if you're only seeing a workshop once every 2 years can kind of go a bit wrong, and it's going to impact your range and also the stability of a car with this many batteries under the floor. I think that's something that's not talked about enough when it comes to EV ownership, but it is nice to see that Volvo is leaning into the fact that EVs don't need to see a workshop as often as combustion cars, and that can't be said for every EV automaker, some of which you do have to go to that workshop once every year or 15,000 Ks like a combustion car, and I think that's unnecessary, but they force you to do it to keep the warranty. So nice to see that Volvo is doing it the right way.
It's pretty impressive that the first 5 years of servicing, which I know in reality is only 2 services, is thrown in for free with 5 years of roadside assist as well. Volvo also offers 5 years of connectivity for the always online multimedia suite, and for those interested, the brand also publishes a life cycle emissions report for this car on its website.
The XC40 may have been out for a little while now, but I really think it has stood the test of time. I still like it as much as the day it launched, and I still like this one specifically as the day I picked it up. It's lovely to drive, it's got plenty of range, especially for city dwellers, and this new version is upgraded in so many ways. To be clear though, there are other options on the market for certain buyers. There are much faster and more powerful EVs, there are more practical EVs, and there are more efficient EVs on the market now, but the XC40 still stands out as being a really nice balance of all of those elements. What do you think? Would you pick this over a BMW iX1 or a Mercedes EQA or a Lexus UX? Tell us in the comments below, and as always, make sure to check out all 3 of our long-term chapters over at carsguide.com.au for all of our findings on this car.